There's a whole layer of music from the 1960s and 70s that never makes the classic rock rotation anymore. Songs that were everywhere once, on jukeboxes, on AM radio, at school dances, and then quietly disappeared. If you lived through those years, some of these might come back to you immediately. If you didn't, you're about to find out what you missed. These are You Don't Remember These 10 Songs, unless you're a baby boomer. Number 10, Smokin' in the Boys' Room by Brownsville Station. Brownsville Station came out of Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1969, built on a foundation of Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and early rock and roll. They had cut 2 albums and were playing clubs and colleges throughout the Midwest relentlessly. What guitarist Michael Lutz later described as their version of what Hamburg had been for the Beatles. They were building something real, but the wider music industry wasn't paying much attention. By 1973, they had trimmed down to a trio: Cub Koda on guitar and vocals, Lutz on bass, and Henry H-Bomb Weck on drums. Their third album, Yeah, was mostly cover songs. What was unusual about it was the one original track that would change everything. Koda wrote Smokin' in the Boys' Room in about 30 minutes, drawing from his own memories of sneaking cigarettes with friends into the men's room at the Clinton Theater in Ann Arbor on Friday nights. He shifted the setting from a movie house to a schoolhouse, and the result was 3 minutes of pure teenage defiance, blaring guitars, a harmonica solo, and a spoken intro that hooked you before the first chord had finished ringing. The producer, Doug Morris, who would later become head of Atlantic Records and at various points run Universal Music and Sony Music, hated the song. He refused to release it as a single. A Portland, Maine FM station started playing it off the album, and orders topped 100,000 before Morris had agreed to press a single copy. He changed his mind. Smokin' in the Boys' Room reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January 1974 and went gold. Brownsville Station toured 347 nights that year alone. The band broke up in 1979. Koda became a respected music journalist and blues scholar, writing the Vinyl Junkie column for Goldmine magazine and co-authoring Blues for Dummies. He died of kidney disease in July 2000 at the age of 51. In 1985, Mötley Crüe covered the song on Theater of Pain. That version reached number 16 and became their first top 40 hit, introducing a new generation to a record that Brownsville Station had built from the ground up in Ann Arbor more than a decade earlier. The original version has been largely displaced in the popular memory by the Crüe cover, which is exactly the kind of thing that happens to bands whose moment was brief and whose industry support was thin. Brownsville Station deserved better than that, and Smokin' in the Boys' Room deserved to be remembered under its original name. Number 9, Wildfire by Michael Murphy. Michael Murphy was a third-year student at UCLA in the late 1960s, grinding through an exhausting assignment, writing a concept album for Kenny Rogers called The Ballad of Calico. The work sometimes ran 20 hours a day. One night, after pushing too hard for too long, he fell into a deep sleep and dreamed the entire song. He wrote it all down the next morning. He believed the dream was rooted in a story his grandfather told him as a child, a Native American legend about a ghost horse. He co-wrote the finished piece with Larry Kanzler, and the result was Wildfire, a haunting narrative about a girl and her pony who vanish in a blizzard on the Nebraska plains and a young man who believes she still rides on stormy nights looking for him. Released in February 1975 as the lead single from his album Blue Sky, Night Thunder, the song reached listeners that most rock radio wasn't reaching. People who wanted a story, a landscape, something they could picture as they listened. The harmonies were provided by Jeff Hanna and Jimmy Ibbotson of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. The piano introduction was constructed around a passage by Russian classical composer Alexander Scriabin. Wildfire peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in June 1975 and went to number 1 on the Adult Contemporary chart, displacing Captain Antonil's Love Will Keep Us Together. It eventually sold over 2 million copies and was certified platinum by the RIAA. The Western Writers of America later included it in their top 100 Western songs of all time. It appeared in a third-season episode of The Simpsons in 1992, and David Letterman became so captivated by it in 2007 that he had Murphy perform it live on his Late Show. For baby boomers who grew up somewhere between the suburbs and wide-open spaces, Wildfire captured something that didn't have another name. Not country, not pop, not rock, but something that felt like all three at once. It also appeared at just the right moment. 1975 was a year when the audience for this kind of music, the kind rooted in landscape and storytelling, rather than pure groove or raw volume, was larger than it had been in years. Murphy had been writing in that tradition for nearly a decade. Wildfire was the song that finally let the right number of people hear what he was doing. Number 8, Holding On to Yesterday by Ambrosia. Ambrosia formed in 1970 in the South Bay area of Los Angeles, specifically San Pedro, built around guitarist David Pack, bassist Joe Puerta, keyboardist Christopher North, and drummer Burley Drummond. Their influences ran from the Beach Boys to King Crimson, and their sound fused progressive rock with symphonic arrangements and the kind of pop instinct that kept everything from becoming too complicated for radio. They had been trying to get a record deal for years when 20th Century Fox Records signed them and brought in producer Freddie Pierrot. For the mixing of their debut album, they worked with Alan Parsons, who had engineered Abbey Road and The Dark Side of the Moon. And the sessions earned the album a Grammy nomination for Best Engineered Recording. Holding On to Yesterday was the debut single, written by Pack and Puerta. Classical violinist Daniel Kobialka played on the track, as did flutist Ernie Watts. Parsons shaped the piano introduction with particular care, giving the whole recording a dreamlike quality that stood apart from most of what was on the radio in the summer of 1975. The single peaked at number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 and spent 17 weeks on the chart. The album reached number 22 on the Billboard 200. All 4 members of Ambrosia went on to play on the first Alan Parsons Project album, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, which was recorded shortly afterward. Ambrosia had bigger commercial hits later in the decade. How Much I Feel reached number 3 in 1978. And The Biggest Part of Me also hit number 3 in 1980, but Holding On to Yesterday was the first time most people heard their name. And for anyone who caught it that summer, it remains one of the more distinctive debut singles of the entire era. Number 7, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, by Looking Glass. Looking Glass formed in 1969 at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, built around guitarist and vocalist Elliot Lurie, keyboardist Larry Gonski, bassist Peter Sweevil, and drummer Jeff Grob. They built a following playing frat parties and bars across the tri-state area, caught the attention of Clive Davis, and were signed to Epic Records. Lurie had written Brandy about a girl named Randy he had dated in high school. He changed the name for the recording. The song was initially intended as the B-side to the album's first single, not the lead track. In February 1972, Epic promotion man Robert Mundell took a test pressing of the debut Looking Glass album to every radio station in the Washington/Baltimore region. At the AM, program director Harv Moore put Brandy into 1-hour rotation for 2 days. The switchboard, Moore later recalled, lit up in a way he had never seen in 15 years in radio. Epic rush-released the single, and when it hit stores 2 weeks later, it was already number 1 in Washington, D.C. without a single copy having been sold. Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 1 week on August 26, 1972, and went gold. Following the song's release, the name Brandy ranked 353rd in popularity for baby girls in 1971, jumped to 140th in 1972, and 82nd in 1973. Barry Manilow's 1974 hit Mandy was a cover of a song originally titled Brandy, written by Scott English. Manilow changed the title specifically to avoid confusion with the Looking Glass single. Peter Swivel, the band's original bassist, died in January 1990. The song reached a new generation when it was prominently featured in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 in 2017. Number 6. Precious and Few by Climax.
Precious and few are the moments we took in.
Climax came together from the wreckage of a legal dispute. Sonny Geraci had been the lead singer of The Outsiders, a Cleveland band that hit the top 5 in 1966 with Time Won't Let Me, when original Outsiders founder Tom King sued Geraci over the right to the name and won. Geraci was forced to start over. He gathered guitarist Walter Nims, keyboardist Nick D'Amico, and drummer John Gutman, renamed the group Climax, and relocated to Los Angeles. Nims wrote Precious and Few, and the band first recorded it in 1970. The session sat in the Bell Records archives for months before a Bell executive happened to hear it playing on a Santa Barbara radio station. Carousel Records, a Bell subsidiary, tested it in Hawaii, then in Buffalo and Boston. It built momentum at each stop. By February 1972, it had peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and hit number 1 on the Cashbox Top 100. It sold over 1 million copies and went gold. Vocal arranger Tom Baylor shaped the background harmonies, and they became integral to what made the song instantly recognizable. Precious and Few became a fixture at proms and weddings throughout the early 1970s. Geraci's voice, capable of extraordinary ballad range, gave the spare arrangement an emotional weight it might not have had with a lesser singer. The follow-up, Life and Breath, peaked at only number 52. Their sole album stalled at number 177 on the Billboard 200. Without adequate label support, Climax quietly disbanded by the mid-1970s.
Precious and few are the moments we took in.
Number 5. Shannon by Henry Gross. Henry Gross had been part of the music world as early as August 1969, when he performed at Woodstock as a member of Sha Na Na, the doo-wop revival group that played during the festival's final night. After leaving the group, he pursued a solo career and signed with Lifesong Records, releasing records that earned regional attention without breaking through nationally. Shannon changed that in 1976. Gross wrote the song about the death of a golden retriever named Shannon who had belonged to Beach Boys guitarist Carl Wilson. When the dog died, it affected Wilson deeply, and Gross, who was part of the Beach Boys' wider circle, turned that grief into a song. The backstory wasn't widely known initially. Most radio listeners simply heard a beautifully direct ballad about the loss of a beloved companion.
Just like the one in our backyard.
The production was restrained and clean, built around Gross's voice and an arrangement that resisted the urge to oversell the emotion. Released in 1976, Shannon reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and spent 14 weeks on the chart. What set Shannon apart in 1976 was its subject. A pop single openly grieving an animal, not a romance, not a broken dream, but a dog, was unusual for radio. And the straightforwardness with which Gross handled the loss gave the song an honesty that connected immediately with anyone who had ever loved a pet and lost one. Gross never matched that commercial success on the pop charts again. He continued writing and performing for decades afterward. For most listeners, Shannon is the whole story, which in its own way is a measure of how much that one song got right. Number 4, What You See Is What You Get by The Dramatics. The Dramatics formed in Detroit in 1964, one of many soul vocal groups that came out of the city during the years when Motown was reshaping American pop music. They went through multiple lineup changes and several label stops in their early years, recording without traction. By 1970, with Ron Banks, William Howard, Willie Ford, Larry Demps, and Elbert Wilkins as the core lineup, They signed with Stax Records in Memphis, and that is where their sound found its proper home. What You See Is What You Get was released in 1971, written and produced by Tony Hester. It was built on a propulsive, insistent groove that was unmistakably Stax, rawer and more southern in character than the polished Motown sound the Dramatics had grown up around, with a gospel pulse running through the whole thing. The song was constructed as much for a stage as for a record, and when they performed it live, that energy translated completely. The single reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 3 on the R&B chart. The album of the same name became one of the stronger soul records of 1971 and helped establish the Dramatics as one of the major vocal groups working in the Southern soul tradition. The band remained active and continued recording well into the decade. What You See Is What You Get appeared on the soundtrack of the 2012 film Magic Mike, which introduced it to an audience that hadn't been born when the original was recorded. For anyone who grew up with it in 1971, hearing it again still carries the full feeling of what it was when it first came out of the radio. Stax Records itself would go bankrupt in 1975, taking a number of careers with it, but the records it produced in those years remain among the best American soul music ever made, and the Dramatics' contribution to that catalog is one the genre still benefits from. Number 3, Vehicle by Ides of March. The Ides of March came out of Berwyn, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, where they started as a high school band in the mid-1960s. After years of clubs and road dates, they had developed into a professional unit with a horn-driven rock sound that put them somewhere in the territory of Chicago and blood, sweat, and tears, though with more raw energy and a harder edge. Jim Peterick, the band's lead singer and guitarist, wrote Vehicle as a teenager. He had a specific sound in mind: the drive of James Brown combined with the architecture of a big band horn arrangement. He was 18 years old when the song was recorded. Vehicle was released in 1970 on Warner Brothers Records. The horn section was not decorative. It was the structural core of the track, pushing the song forward with a momentum that most guitar-driven rock of that year couldn't match. The song opened with a spoken passage before the horns came in, and from the first full bar, it was clear something different was happening. The single climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1970 and sold over 1 million copies. The Ides of March never cracked the top 40 with a subsequent single. The band went through lineup changes and disbanded in the mid-1970s. Peterick went on to co-write Eye of the Tiger for Survivor in 1982, the theme from Rocky III, which spent 6 weeks at number 1. He also became a prolific songwriting collaborator for 38 Special, co-writing many of their biggest hits starting in 1979. For a song that nearly went to number 1 and sold 1 million copies, Vehicle has become quietly obscure. That gap between how big it was and how rarely it gets mentioned is exactly the point of this list. The horn arrangement alone, tight, aggressive, and perfectly timed, is something any musician would recognize as genuinely excellent work. The fact that most people couldn't name the band that recorded it says less about the song than it does about how quickly even legitimate hits can disappear when there's no follow-up to anchor them in the memory. Number 2, Timothy by The Boys. The Boys formed in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in the late 1960s, a working bar band with modest ambitions playing the Northeastern Circuit. Their connection to a larger story came through songwriter Rupert Holmes, who would later write Escape, the Pina Colada song, in 1979, and who composed Timothy as a deliberate experiment. The premise of Timothy was intentionally provocative: 3 men trapped in a mine collapse, and the implication in the final verse that 2 of the survivors may have resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. Holmes wrote it specifically to test whether a song with that subject could be recorded and played on mainstream radio before programmers caught on to what they were actually playing. The experiment worked. Several stations played Timothy without catching the implication in the lyrics. When the subject became more widely understood, Some stations banned it. The controversy generated exactly the attention Holmes had anticipated, and that attention sold records. Released in 1971, the single reached number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was the buoy's only chart entry. Holmes walked away from the whole episode with a well-documented understanding of how to write a song people could not stop discussing, which served him well for the rest of a long and successful career as a songwriter. For baby boomers who were teenagers in 1971, Timothy was the kind of song you whispered to your friends about, half convincing each other you were mishearing the lyrics, half certain you weren't. That specific kind of shared teenage discovery, something edgy enough to feel like a secret, catchy enough to keep playing anyway, was part of what made AM radio in the early 1970s a genuinely unpredictable experience. You genuinely didn't know what was going to come out of the speaker next. Holmes understood that, and he built a song around it. Number 1. Sharing the Night Together by Dr. Hook.
Sharing the night together.
Dr. Hook had been around since the early 1970s, recording under the full name Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. They were best known in their early years for their connection to songwriter Shel Silverstein, whose wit and storytelling gave the band some of their most recognizable material, and for Sylvia's Mother, their 1972 breakthrough that reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. By the mid-1970s, they had shortened their name to Dr. Hook, moved to Capitol Records, and were refining a sound that leaned toward polished soft rock with a warmer, more romantic sensibility. The band consisted of Ray Sawyer, whose eye patch and cowboy hat made him instantly recognizable, alongside lead vocalist Dennis LeCourriere, guitarist Rick Elswit, and a rhythm section that had been honed over years of relentless touring. Sharing the Night Together was written by Ava Aldridge and Eddie Strozic, and had originally been released as a single by Arthur Alexander in 1976. That version failed to chart. Dr. Hook recorded it for their 1978 album, Pleasure and Pain, and the result was something considerably different. LeCourriere's vocal interpretation brought a genuine warmth to the material, and the production, helmed by Ron Halfkeen, created an intimate late-night atmosphere that fit perfectly with what late 1970s radio audiences were looking for.
Sharing the night together.
The single entered the Billboard Hot 100 in October of 1978, climbing steadily over 16 weeks before peaking at number 6. It spent a total of 4 months in the top 40 and sold over 1 million copies. The Pleasure and Pain album, buoyed by the single's success, became the band's first gold album in the United States. Dr. Hook followed it with When You're in Love with a Beautiful Woman in 1979, which hit number 6 in the US and reached number 1 in the UK. Sexy Eyes then hit number 5 in 1980. The band had a genuine run of commercial success at the end of the decade. Sharing the Night Together sits in a particular space in the baby boomer memory. Not the most celebrated song of the era by any measure, but the kind of record that plays on the radio late on a Saturday night and takes you directly back to wherever you were when you were young, and the whole weekend still stretched out ahead of you. Dr. Hook never achieved the kind of critical recognition that their sales figures might have suggested they deserved. They were always more popular with audiences than with reviewers, which was a common enough fate for bands working in the soft rock lane in the late 1970s. But the people who loved their records loved them genuinely, and the songs held up in ways that more critically favored records from the same period sometimes didn't. Sharing the Night Together is a good example of that. It doesn't try to be more than it is, and exactly because of that, it still sounds right 50 years later.
Sharing the night together.
None of these songs get played much anymore, but they were all real hits in their time, and every one of them earned its place on the radio in ways that the biggest artists of the era would have recognized. The music that gets forgotten isn't always the music that deserved to be. Some of it was just unlucky. Wrong label, wrong timing, no follow-up. Some of it was simply ahead of the format that radio was ready for. Either way, it's still there if you go looking. If this brought something back, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more of this left to find.